This is the Fantastic Books Podcast,
the fantasy and sci-fi book review podcast for fantasy fanatics, book nerds, and lovers of lore and stories.
covering some of the most loved fantasy series as well as brand new novels.
With your hosts, Anna
And Sam. Let's see what we're reading this week. Welcome back, listeners. It's your favorite hosts, Sam and Anna, and this is Fantastic Books and How to Read Them.
And this week we are covering chapters 37 through 41 of Patrick Rothfuss's The Name of the Wind. I know we are way behind schedule in terms of releasing episodes, and we will try to do better in the future, but I'm not making any promises.
Rona's gotten the world a little crazy. We took a little hiatus, but we're back, ready for more fantastic episodes, and excited to be pushing out new content.
Yeah. So, are you ready to get into chapter 37? I don't have anything new, announcement-wise.
Nope, things are good. We're ready to get back into our adventure, and we're actually in the middle of an awesome section of the book. Kvothe is finally admitted to university, and he totally nailed his, I don't want to call it an audition, but basically his...
They just call it admissions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, his, oral exam, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so right where he left off was when they told him he'd been admitted and they were going to give him money to come to the university, which sounds pretty unprecedented in this world. So, chapter 37 opens with Master Lauren bringing Kvothe to the bursar to explain to the bursar that he's getting money back. And on the way, they encounter Simon, and we are introduced to a new character.
Yep, Simon, is described as having a boyish face, not quite clearly, set as, a man yet. He's an adult, but he doesn't have, the features that distinguish him as, out of adolescence and into adulthood fully.
I don't think he's that old.
No, he's, 19.
Yeah, so Kvothe's what, 15?
Yeah, so a couple years older.
He said he's a couple years older.
Got sandy blonde hair. I wouldn't quite say
I think he just
weak.
hasn't, come into his own yet. I picture him as very kind of, awkward and gangly and, not realizing that he has an adult's body yet and kind of shy because of how uncomfortable he is. But he means well, and he becomes good friends with Kvothe pretty much right off the bat.
In short, all the attributes of the perfect supporting character.
I know, he's the sidekick. Who's just happy to be there.
Literally.
I know. So Simon helps him get a room and a meal. What do they call it? A meal chit. He gets set up with basically a public dormitory.
Yeah.
But he's so happy to have a bed and a little space of his own, obviously because he's been living on the streets. And he gets the equivalent of a meal plan at college.
Yeah.
So it's, you get served whatever the cafeteria has, but once again, Kvothe is stoked to have 3 full meals a day.
Yeah, no, he's going to be doing just fine.
Mm-hmm.
So Kvothe gets settled in, he starts getting kind of toured around, and figures out what classes he's going to be taking.
Yep, and throughout this, Simon brings him to the mess hall, and he introduces him to basically,
the gang.
The gang, yeah.
Yeah.
So the gang is made up of Mene and Willem, sorry. And occasionally in and out of the group is Savoy, who's a high-class citizen from a different country or city-state.
Yeah. Well, Savoy, there's B tier. He's D tier friend.
Yeah, he's just kind of a periphery character.
Yeah. No.
But he does sit with them occasionally, and he is introduced as part of this little group at this point.
Yeah.
But Mene is the oldest student in the Arcanum, and he has no desire to progress any higher than he is.
Yeah, and he's literally the first tier.
Yeah. I think he's just one of those people that's a student for life.
Yeah,
and
he's just a forever Elir, where...
But he doesn't want to move up.
No, as he says, he keeps his tuition down, and there's little to be expected of him.
Mm-hmm.
But, I don't know, it's kind of the saying, jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing.
That's true.
And I think there's a certain quality to respect out of that, but you'd think somebody ought to have more ambition. I know he has other strengths that get demonstrated throughout the series, that he's pretty capable in the fishery and everything else. He's an interesting character. It just surprises me that he hasn't accomplished more with all his time at the university.
Yeah, I think it's also a little bit weird for, like, a 50-year-old man to be hanging out with, like, 18-year-olds. That's more, like, where it's coming from. And then Willem, he's Kjaldish, so he is from... Oh, just Kjald, yeah. So every time we listen to the audiobook, he has a fun accent. Whoever does the audiobook does a great job, but it's nice to listen to all the different voices he does. And he is pretty quiet, but I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that there's a language barrier, because he does open up more as the series progresses.
Yeah, that and, like, his native, like, language is far, like, very different from a Turin, which is what they speak in the Commonwealth.
Mm-hmm. So
it's kind of cool. Tim and Kavoth and their friendship develops that they kind of help each other language-wise kind of improve.
Yeah. And then, but, like, even at the end of this section of chapters, like, Willem is, like, a really good friend support-wise.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, like, always there to, like, chat, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and then Savoy shows up and he's just kind of like...
the dingus.
He is royal from a different country, so he's, like, used to being a higher class citizen and is very affronted by, you know, like, having to pay tuition and eat with everyone else in the mess hall and stuff.
He's a royal pampered prince. Yeah, he's just a brat.
I know. So they make fun of him. I think he's introduced here because they start talking about how hard of a time he had. They're like, remember when he had to give up his manservant? Remember when he had to give up his rooms at the Golden Pony?
Yeah.
And then Kavoth says, yeah, this time he had to sell his rings, indicating that he had noticed that there was, like, tan lines on his hands, and showing that he was, like, very clever and kind of winning the respect of his peers in that situation. So... They think he's very...
more than meets the eye.
Yeah.
Transformers!
And then, because of that, Manet asks him what he wants to study, and Kavoth says he wants to study the Chandrian, which actually happens just after Manet bets that Kavoth will be admitted into the Arcanum very quickly, and then he gets all annoyed that Kavoth's like, yeah, I'm going to study some fairy tales.
Oh, yeah. And Manet almost kind of gets angry, where he's like, are you serious? I just, like, bet you're gonna do well and you're gonna be, like, chasing, like, nonsense fairy tales. And
I think he's also kind of, like, a hardened student at this point.
Yeah.
Like, you know when people come in and they're, like, either undeclared or, like, have very, like,
well, it's like when
high ambitions.
Yeah.
And then people who tend to be returning students are very driven and focused and, like, don't have, not necessarily high ambitions at all, but I think more direct goals than, like, I'm gonna improve the world.
Yeah, it's more or less like the Chandrian's kind of like a fluff piece.
Yeah.
Anywho, they gotta bust Kavoth's chops about it, and he says, oh, no, it's more of, like, folklore research, and he kind of, like, tries to cover his tracks a little bit.
Yeah, he throws around, like, some theories, like, I'm gonna test to see if there's, like, commonalities in the folklore across cultures and see how it, like, aligns with such and such theory or whatever.
Yeah, like wink, wink.
So he makes it sound a lot more impressive and academic than I'm studying fairy stories.
Yes. After that, they make their way over to the archives, because after all this time, Kavoth finally gets admitted in. He wants to be able to see he can't quite go to the Arcanum yet, but he can at least go to...
The library?
Yeah, he can go to the archives and, like, see all these books that he's been hearing about and, like, dying to read.
Well, because remember, he got turned away before admissions and was told he couldn't come in, so now that he's in the club, he's ready to go and check out all the books and do research.
And we're greeted by our favorite antagonist.
Is this our first time meeting
Ambrose?
Ambrose?
Yes. Ambrose Jackass.
Ambrose Jackass.
So, there's a lot with Ambrose, and I just love the way they write this. Just, where is it?
He reminds me a lot of Malfoy. Like, my father. Father. I'm royal. What?
Well, he's like 12th... His father was like the 12th in line to the throne.
That's so far away.
Yeah, his dad's like a high Count Ventus. They're very powerful family.
That's like saying, like, my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandma was something cool. Like, all right.
What are you doing?
What are you up to then?
I have a lot of satisfaction out of this passage that's used to describe him. His face was built to scowl. His hands were soft and pale. His blinding white linen shirt and richly dyed blue vest reeked of money. The part of me that was not long removed from Tarbean wanted to pick his pocket. Just, like, complete jerk.
He's the exact opposite of Kavoth.
Yeah, so he gives Kavoth a really hard time, a lot of attitude about not being on the list for the archives, and it's because he just got admitted, so they immediately kind of already button heads and not getting along.
Oh, and then he's like, let me guess, you were the one smart kid in your town, and you say your parents saved up all your money to send you here. And it's kind of funny because I think that actually describes Kavoth's story had his family been fine.
Yeah.
Like, he was a remarkably bright child, and his family would have saved up, and he would have had to travel really far to come to the university. Instead, obviously, that's not what happened to him, but I think he's describing exactly how Kavoth's life would have been had his family not been killed by the Chandrian.
Yeah. So basically, he doesn't get in to the archives just yet, but this was a really important part of the plot, which I really enjoy, was the fact that Ambrose kind of just shuts him down. He doesn't get in, and where Kavoth then says, "You might think this encounter left me disheartened. You might think I felt betrayed, my childhood dreams of the university cruelly shattered. And on the contrary, it reassured me. I had been feeling rather out of my element until Ambrose let me know in his own special way that there wasn't much difference between the university and the streets of Tarbian. No matter where you are, people are basically the same. Besides, anger can keep you warm at night, and a wounded pride can spur a man to do wondrous things."
Oh, I love these lines.
Like, the fire's lit, he's like, okay, like...
It's definitely, and you and I talk about this a lot, but those times when someone tells you, I don't think you can do that, or like, you'll never be able to, or those times where you're like, fine, I'll accomplish my goals, just you wait and see.
Yeah, like...
Watch me.
A total, I'll show you.
Yeah. So he clearly has, like, more desire than ever now to, like, do well, and I think it is definitely important because he was kind of, like, put up on this pedestal real quick of impressing all the masters and getting money, and things were going really, really well, so I think he was thinking, like, how much longer is my good luck gonna last?
Yeah.
But it is interesting because he, as we see, quickly makes a big reputation for himself at the university, and whether or not things go well or not for him, I think his life becomes pretty different from how it was in Tarbian.
Definitely.
Like, he becomes somebody, so everything he does is amplified.
Yeah. And a big part of his character as a person is that he thrives on challenges, whether he realizes it or not. So the fact that he got to university and it was like, okay, I've got accepted, I've come in, my food's being taken care of, I have a place to rest at night. He's like, all my needs are being met, like, great, but, like, I don't know how to handle that.
Yeah.
So then when he has somebody that kind of, like, reminds him, like, hey, you're just a person, nobody cares, like, I'm challenging you, I think that challenge kind of is good for him.
I think also in his mind, he was like, great, I'll get to the university, I'll learn about the Chandrian, and then, like, all those other things just fell into place for him. And so I think it almost seemed too easy of, like, yeah, I'll just go to the library, learn about the Chandrian, check, no problem, I'll avenge my family.
Yeah.
And he had, like, a few hours of good luck, and then was immediately like,
It's like, good, reality's still here.
That's not happening for you.
And thus begins our next chapter. Chapter 38. Sympathy in the Mains.
Sympathy in the Mains is where Kavoth has his very first class at the university. And they talk about Mains being the oldest building in the university, and I think this actually becomes really important. So, Mains is like a building that... It's almost like a city made out of buildings, so it just, like, kept growing and growing, and there's, like, courtyards that are blocked off, and walls that you can't enter anymore, and, like, rooms that don't make sense, and it's completely illogical.
It kind of reminds me of a slightly organized version of the Winchester Mansion.
Oh, yeah!
Which is a really interesting story.
That's a fascinating story. I'm not going to go into the Winchester story, but if anyone's interested, basically, a very quick rundown is someone thought they would be haunted by ghosts unless their house was constantly under construction, so they just built a nonsense house. So there's, like, stairways that go nowhere, and doors in the floor, and windows in the ceilings, and rooms that had been completely blocked off, and it was just constantly under construction for years and years and years and years. But you can look up that on your own time. What I was going to say is that later on we realized that Mains is kind of connected to a portion that's underground.
Yes, it is. That's right.
So it's large and sprawling, but it's even bigger than Kavoth realizes because it goes deep underground as well, and that part has been currently abandoned. Not like everyone's like, that part's abandoned, but like just it's not used anymore and nobody goes there and it's kind of been forgotten about, almost like the way like nobody uses sewers.
Yeah, the under thing.
Yeah, so...
we can get into some of that stuff later, because some really interesting theories.
There's some really interesting theories about what's going on down there. But I just think it's funny, because he's like, you know, it's rumored that there's ghosts, or that, you know, students got bricked off inside a room. Like, the classic rumors that always happen at schools. It's like the pool on the roof, or like...
It gives me, like, a fun little Hogwarts vibe, though, with that.
Yeah, it definitely does.
Because it's all, like, weird, sprawling corridors.
Shortcuts.
The ghosts of the students still, you know, going through the library. Like, it
is very similar.
There's a whimsical element to it that I enjoy.
I do like it a lot. So Kavoth gets to his first class, which is taught by...
none other than Master Hem, or Heme.
I don't know how it's pronounced.
I say Heme in my head, but...
I did too, but I think the audiobook said Hem. Either way.
He's a jerk.
He's a big douchebag.
Yeah.
So the first thing he does is students are trickling in, and like I just said, Mainz is complicated, it's sprawling, it's big, it's really hard to find your way around, and anyone who's ever been to a college with even a remotely, like, medium-sized campus knows that on the first week of classes, everybody is always late because nobody knows where anything is yet. So if you add that factor in, obviously people are showing up late. Kavoth got there early. He didn't bring anything with him, like no note paper or any way to take notes, but he's not really bothered by this. So Heme does his little spiel, which is very much like Snape's, I can teach you how to stop her death and brew whatever. You know what I'm talking about?
Bottle death and brew glory.
That's it, yeah. So he's like, you want to be magicians? That doesn't exist. You can leave, because you won't find it here.
Yeah.
Which I think has got to be how he starts every semester. But then this kid comes in, Gel, and he...
oh, this kid gets torn apart.
Ugh, I know.
Classically shows up late.
He gets shown up late, and then Master Heme is like, do you, know how clocks work?
What does he say? He's like, do you follow the something calendar?
I think that's the next kid.
Oh.
Yeah. So he gives Gel a hard time, and then the second kid, Basil, comes in, and he goes, you wouldn't happen to be from Yale? And, of course, obviously Basil says no, because he's just walking right into a trap.
Yeah.
So Heme's like, oh, well, I guess I could have given you an excuse if you were, because I heard that those people don't use clocks the way we do. But if you know how to use a clock, then you have no excuse for being late. And assigns him a paper to write on the differences between their calendar and the Yalish calendar, which is like a classic professor move right there. So several other students come in late, and then a woman comes in, and he's so mean to her.
Well, no, he's deceptively mean at first.
He's nice, and then he's such a jerk.
And then just wrecks her, because he, like, shows up, he's like, my dear, you know.
I'm so glad you're here. I'm glad we didn't start class without you.
What's your name? Like, guides her to the front row.
Yeah, gives her this horrible false sense of security, and then tells her to close her legs.
Just drops the bomb.
And she does, and then he says, now that the gates of hell are closed, we can begin class. Yeah. I hate him.
Well, I don't think for plot-wise it was like him shaming her. I think it was just like, the very idea of a young woman in front of an old man, he can't handle it, kind of thing.
Oh, no, I think it's very much like the ivory tower is reserved for men, and you shouldn't be here.
Oh, okay, that's a good point.
I don't know what Patrick Rothfuss's, like, experiences with higher education or academia are, but there's definitely so much sexism from, like, old professors. So I think it was just a jab at the institutional sexism and racism built into, like, a bunch of old white professors who never want to leave their jobs and don't teach anything new because they've been in their position for the last 40 years.
Tenured.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that.
Anyway.
The rest of the lecture just kind of goes as expected for an intro course, but Kavoth, being the brilliant person that he is kind of disappointed.
Because he's learned it all from Ben already.
Yeah, he learned this years ago, and it's review for him at this point.
Yep.
He attempts to go over to Master Hem, and he basically says, you know, that was informative for the other classmates.
But he really has learned all this, and Hime says they can talk about it tomorrow?
Yes, tomorrow.
Yep. Before class, correct?
Correct.
Okay. But does not talk to Kavoth today.
Oh, no.
After being kind of rude to him, too. He's like, oh, our little prodigy, what do you want?
Yeah.
Oh, he makes me so mad. I hate him.
And so, after class, Kavoth makes his way back over to the archives, and he meets another character, Fela.
He finally gets in this time, though.
Yes.
Oh, it's just so exciting.
And he can go over to Stax.
There's two different, ways you can go.
Oh, I'm sorry, not Stax. He gets to go to Tomes.
Oh, that's right.
Stax is for the Arcanum.
Stax is for the Arcanum, and that's kind of like a library. You can walk around and find your own research, and Tomes is like a big study room, and you can write down what books you'd like, and a librarian will bring them to you.
Right. Fela's been awesome. She kind of shows him around, gets him a little bit oriented.
Yeah, she's cool. She's very cool.
He learns, the general rules of the archives, and Fela lets him know, if you want to find something other than on your own, you can write it down, and, one of the scrivs, the people who work in the archives, will, retrieve it for him.
Mm-hmm.
So he starts writing down anything on, the Chandrian or the Emir, and he's kind of just browsing around as, people bring forward books. And he gets a little disappointed when he realizes there isn't a lot of information available.
But while he's waiting around, this is just a side note, he picks up one of the books to read, which is The Mating Habits of the Common Dracus.
Yes.
And that's written by...
Scarpy.
No.
It's not Scarpy?
Chronicler.
Oh, that's right.
He's writing down his story right now.
That's right, because he says, I was looking for a legend and I found a lizard.
Yep. Which is why he goes looking for Kavoth, because Kavoth's a legend, too.
Yes, that's right. I don't know why I thought Scarpy.
That's okay.
Anywho. And also really interesting plot point that comes into play here is Master Loren actually finds Kavoth and requests that he, walk and talk with him for a minute.
Yeah, so Kavoth got a first set of books, and it was
It was a couple
general
children's tales.
Children's books, and nothing very helpful. So then he does a second request. And that's when Lauren comes and is like, let's have a little chat.
Because he was like, you have an interest in the Chandra and the Emir. And he goes, is this in the regard of an assignment from one of your instructors? He basically was tempted to tell Master Loren about his parents, but he realized he didn't want to look foolish.
Can I bring up something?
Yes.
Or do you want to finish that?
Yeah, I just want to bring it up because I know exactly what you're going to say.
Okay, you bring it up and then I'll bring up mine.
Alright. So, instead, he was just saying that he was just looking this up to satisfy his curiosity. And Loren then gives him a little bit of what seems like a prepared history of the Emir and kind of their history. And
it's the textbook answer.
Yeah, very much so. He goes, a piece of advice. The Emir are dramatic figures. When we are young, we all pretend to be Emir and fight battles with willow switch swords. It is natural for boys to be attracted to those stories. He met my eyes. However, a man, an arcanist, must focus himself on the present day. He must attend to practical things. And he held Kavoth's eyes as he said this. You are young, and many will judge you by this fact alone. So in a way, he is telling him that he's engaging in the appearance of being boyish and fanciful.
Yeah,
and
he
kind
really
of embarrasses
dissuades him from looking into it anymore. And when Kavoth asks, well, where did the Emir come from? He gets kind of a flat, they came from the Arturian Empire.
Yes.
Don't ask anymore. But the thing I was going to bring up before was that, and I read this on a fan theory, and maybe I'm looking too much into it, but Lauren says, and this is one of the reasons I think Lauren is a member of the Emir. One, he obviously does not want to draw attention to the Emir or the fact that someone's trying to look them up. And he tells Kavoth not to go looking for them. And whoever brought the books the first time, there was very, very little information on the Chandrian and the Emir. So clearly someone in the library has been controlling or actively taking those out of circulation and availability. But the other thing I wanted to say is, so Lauren says, you have an interest in the Chandrian and the Emir. Is this in regard to an assignment? A single assignment, therefore indicating that the Chandrian and the Emir are linked and would obviously go together in one question versus like, did someone tell you to look up the Chandrian, and did someone separately tell you to look up the Emir? Because it's not public knowledge that they're connected in any way.
Oh, I didn't think about it like that before. That's actually really interesting.
Yeah, and I saw it on a fan theory, and I don't really know if I'm reading way too much into it, but if someone suggests that, like, these two things are associated together under one topic, maybe Lauren knows more about the Chandrian and the Emir than he is letting on to.
That's a good point. I was also going to say another, like, kind of clue or signal that Loren could also be the Emir was the fact that whenever they talk about the Emir or the Chandrian, it's never with the actual fearful intent, because they don't want anyone to actually take it seriously or kind of regard them. Like, the Chandrian are always perceived as, like, a children's nightmare story, and the Emir are always, like, these mythical beings that may or may not have existed for the greater goods, but...
It's almost like, if it's like, knights and dragons!
Yes,
like,
and so...
There were knights, and in our world, they are a factual thing, but associating them with dragons and making them into this kind of, like, fanciful, exciting thing for children...
Yeah.
Is how it's perceived.
But within this world, specifically, the Emir were real. Mm-hmm. And there's, like, history books that support, like, actual events that they were part of and, like, actions they took. But as far as recent information, there's nothing. And I think it would make perfect sense for somebody in the Emir to oversee all the knowledge stores of the university, because they would truly be controlling the circulation of any information on them. It's brilliant.
Yes. It makes so much sense. And later, this is, like, really stretching, but Simon refers to Lauren as like a standing stone, and the Waystones are always associated with the Fey realm and the Chandrian and the Emir, and just his description of being called a standing stone I thought was, like, an interesting choice of words later on.
No, it is kind of a good, like, clue or synonym.
Yeah, I think there's lots of tiny, tiny little clues. And maybe I'm way off the mark, because when I was researching this, it seems like the fan base is fairly split on whether or not he's a member of the Emir, but personally, I think he is. And that brings us to Chapter 39, Enough Rope. So, I love this chapter.
It's a great chapter, and it's definitely one of my favorites in this first part of Kavoth's education at the university. Alright, so it's day 2, and Kavoth is again attending his Introduction to Sympathy course with Heme.
He shows up early.
He does, and he tries to catch
Heme ahead of time, so he doesn't have to sit through another class. And then a bunch of shit goes down. Oh yeah, no, it really hits the fan. It's great. So Heme just addresses the entire class. He's like, I have pleasant news, everyone. Mr. Kavoth here has assured me that his complete grasp of the principles of sympathy. In doing so, he's offered to give today's lecture. If this happened to me, I would freak out.
Yeah, I know. Anyone else would be like, uh-oh. And Heme totally misjudged Kavoth. He didn't realize how smart he actually was, how good...
Well, also, like, how good at being in front of an audience. Like, even if Kavoth knew all those things, but for me personally, if I am giving a speech or a lecture or a presentation and I don't prepare, it's really bad.
Oh, yeah.
And he has such good command of the audience and indicates, like, when to clap. He's like the perfect showman.
So Kavoth goes up to the board and he starts outlining the basic principles of sympathy.
It's honestly a pretty good lecture. Like, I know we learned it from Ben at the beginning, but I feel like he explains the concept of how magic works in this book really well.
Right, so he kind of gives the first few properties of sympathy and demonstrations, and then he moves on to comparing like substances, and in doing so, he asks Heme for a hair. And obviously, people who've read these stories know that if you actually have any hair or blood of a person, it's a decently strong sympathetic link
to their body.
And so Heme clearly underestimated Kavoth, but this part's just awesome. He creates like a wax doll of Heme.
I love when he asks how he can make the doll more similar, and someone's like, put a little robe on him.
Yeah.
So cute.
In doing so, Kavoth then, which is really impressive because it's a very small, like, percentage link, but he does a double binding to the fire and to the...
Yeah, so Kavoth sets up, like, as he's lecturing, sets up a brazier and is explaining how you create links between things and how to make the links stronger. And his example for this is to make an example of Heme that he's going to then link to Heme, and then he makes takes
a candle
and links it to a fire, so each of those are connected to two separate things. And then he puts the little doll over the flame of the candle.
Right, and so...
But the first time...
The intention's just to give him a little bit of a hot foot.
But it's, like, not enough for Heme to feel anything. So, as he's about to interrupt Kavoth for, like, not performing the experiment properly, Kavoth's like, perfect! Yep, that's exactly what I intended to do, so that's why I have to create this double binding. So that's when he connects the flame to the candle. And when he then does his example, Heme
exclaims because his foot was burned, and Kavoth then kind of steamrolls on and says, now what if I were to take the doll I made of Heme and throw it in the brazier? And at that point, Heme goes pale and was like, I think we've had enough for today. I think this is a good example of what a clever sympathist can do. And Kavoth, laughs and shakes his hands, and the whole class is clapping and applauding this. But through, like, the smile and the handshake from Heme, you can tell he is absolutely furious.
To be fair, Kavoth basically just did the equivalent of taking out a gun, like cocking the gun, and then be like, what would happen if I pulled the trigger right now?
Right, he basically did malfeasance, even though Heme willingly gave him a hair.
Yeah.
From there, like, he just straight up doesn't even go back to his seat after this whole demonstration. He just leaves the classroom.
During their handshake, though, Kavoth makes, like, a tiny hand gesture as if he could throw the little doll into the fire as, like, a warning of, like, you mess with me, I pushed back, like, if you push any further, I know I'm a lot stronger than you expected.
Yes.
But then he just dips out like a badass.
Yeah, no, it's an awesome scene. Chapter 40, On the Horns. Kavoth exits the class, and word of what happened spreads like wildfire across the university. Everyone is stoked that he kind of put Heme in his place.
Yeah, nobody really likes him.
Yeah, he's terrifying. And so he's having dinner in the mess hall, and he's hanging out with Simon and Savoy.
And they're really worried for him.
Yes, because they know it really wasn't a good decision at all.
Even I think Kavoth kind of got carried away. Like, let the show really happen and was all excited about, like, making his move. But then now his friends are telling him he went too far and he's made a mistake. So it's starting to come to realization, like, maybe I didn't do the best thing.
You messed up. And so it's kind of funny where a kid approaches him and tells him that he's going on the horns to be, like, called in by all the masters for disciplinary action. Mm-hmm. And he's like, I'll go, but I'm having dinner first. And Simon's, like, terrified. He's like, dude, just go. Like, you've been summoned.
Simon is definitely relatable because he can be really meek sometimes. And he's like, don't anger them anymore. Just hurry up and go. But obviously, I mean, Kavoth's his own character anyway, but he also just doesn't want to waste food after having been hungry for so long.
Yeah, he's like, I don't know what's waiting for me in the Master's Hall, but if I'm going, I'd rather have a full stomach for it. And I'm like, that's fair.
That's fair, but I think he then, like, internally says, like, I'm not even hungry, but I just don't want to...
Yeah, it's almost like a pride thing. He's like, I'm not just gonna, like, jump up and go to them because they summoned me. Like, I'll go when I'm ready. Mm-hmm. He messes around with his meal for a couple minutes longer, and then they get up and head over to the horns.
Simon, like, tries to comfort him along the way, but you can tell he's so nervous, too. Like, he makes this, like, weird joke about maybe making a record for being the quickest person to be expelled from the university.
Yeah, like...
Like, good try, Sim, but, not helping.
Exactly. So, when he went into the Master's Hall on the horns, all the
Masters are sitting at this curved table.
Yeah.
And he says from where he's standing, he can see why people call it being on the horns, because the table looks like a set of bullhorns. But basically, he's there on trial. So, all of the Masters are there, plus there's a character who's, like, in charge of, like, running the logistical parts of the school, so like the laundry and stuff, and he's there to take notes as if it's literally like a trial.
And so Heme is accusing Kavoth of malfeasance, which is not tolerated whatsoever.
I think it's a zero tolerance policy.
Where, consequences for that are lashings with a whip and expulsion from the university. It's like really a huge deal. And there was a long history of arcanists doing malfeasance. That's why there's like a zero tolerance policy at the university, because they basically are trying to make amends for previous generations' errors.
Yeah. He also is accusing Kavoth for unauthorized use of sympathy. So I think because he's not in the Arcanum yet, he's not supposed to be performing sympathy, like unsupervised. So he's actually up for 2 accounts.
Yeah. And so Heme is like going full throttle. He's like requesting expulsion. He wants at least 5 lashings.
5 lashings for the first offense and 8 for the second. So 13 total.
And so Kavoth's like head is spinning. He's like, whoa, like what have I got myself into? And I just love this part.
First, the Chancellor asks if he understands what happened to him. And honestly, Kavoth is not sure, so he says no. So then the Master Chancellor explains that, like, if you're not a member of the Arcanum, you cannot use sympathy without permission, like I just said. And it's forbidden to cause harm with sympathy. So that's malfeasance. He asks him again, do you understand? Kavoth says yes at this point because there's really nothing he can say to argue with that. He did do those things, and they are not allowed, so he has to kind of accept his fate. And he says, like, everything's too bright, my knees are trembling, and, like, he's reeling. He's honestly shocked. And then...
it's definitely just Ghost of Jedi's Past, just Ben, a.k.a. Ben Kenobi, but...
Yeah, because the Chancellor says, do you have anything to say in your defense?
And Ben's voice pops in his head, he's like, what? You're not going to defend yourself?
It's so good.
And it's just like, all like rhetoric and logic, like, Arcanist's go-to tool is like sound clear logic.
Yeah, like your best tool is your mind. You have to be clear, and you always have to be ready with a defense.
And it's like that perfect like moment where it's like a water drop like hits like a stagnant pool, and just the ripple effect, his mind just like unlocks. He's like, wait a minute, I understand everything.
I feel like if this were a movie, it would definitely be like, this is so stupid, but like silence, and then like the water drop of like Kavoth understanding, and then just like flashing images really fast of like all his memories from Ben come flooding back, and then in his mind being like, I have to defend myself.
Oh yeah, it's so good.
So he goes into Heart of Stone, collects himself, and he argues his way out of this situation.
Not even argues his way out, just
explains his way out.
Defends himself to the utmost.
So first he says, I had permission. I was not doing unauthorized sympathy. It becomes clear that Heme did not give the full story to all the professors. So Kavoth explains about like the lecture situation and how he was pressured into performing sympathy in front of the class. And he plays dumb a couple of times, saying like, well, I thought it was part of a test, and I had to use the supplies given to me, so that's why I made the moment, and that's what led me to the second offense, which was performing malfeasance or performing harm with sympathy. And because of his explanation of the situation, and because Heme realizes that there was an entire classroom full of students witnessing this, his arguments really starts to fall apart.
And it really talks about, like, the ingenuity and just talent that Kavoth has is, like, really impressive to the other professors.
Yeah.
Because they were saying that the link that he had wasn't very strong, and the fact that he only had a hair, and just the fact that he was able to do a double binding with sympathy, like, really impressed them. And then,
especially so of the people who were noticing that, like, Kilvin really was impressed with this. Alxadal jumps to his defense. And even, is it Arwil?
Yeah.
The
Physiker.
The Physiker, yeah. All are really surprised at like how powerful Kavoth was and how he was able to do this. And
apparently Heme had burns not just on his foot, but like all the way up to the knee.
He said it was all the way up to the knee, which
could be dramatized.
I thought the first time I read this, I thought it was a dramatic thing of him being like, he hurt me, he performed malfeasance, get him out of here. But the way that the other masters are seeing it is like, oh, this kid did a double binding, which in itself is more than a lot of entry-level students in the Arcanum can do. And it was that powerful? That's pretty unheard of.
Yeah, like, he wrecked him.
So, using this logic, Kavoth turns the tide of his judgment.
So they remove the expulsion.
The expulsion's gone, but he does get
3
lashes assigned for the reckless use of sympathy.
But in a way...
Which honestly is, like, still sucks.
Yeah, but you get what you
but,
get.
like, he got a much better situation.
But the perfect insult to injury, using that as, like, enough proof that he is more than just, like, an entry-level student, that he could be admitted into the Arcanum.
Yes, so right at the end they announced his sentence, and he's like, well, you said if I proved I knew the basics of sympathy that I would be admitted to the Arcanum. Does this count?
Like, such a ballsy move.
I'll be so cocky. Yeah, literally, Hemme, like, yells, look here, you little cocker.
You little cocker, it's so good.
It's so funny. I would love to see this acted out. It's so good.
I would love this show to be like an animated series where like every chapter would be like an episode.
There's so much in it. It would be so good. But, yep, he gets admitted into the Arcanum as well, which is...
pretty badass. Day 2,
so wild.
Ruffled some feathers, got into the Arcanum.
Yeah, I think it was Eladin. Was it Eladin or someone? Someone says, like, a lot of students who are in the Arcanum wouldn't be able to perform a double binding at all. So if he can, he deserves to be in there.
Yeah.
He gets in. Hemme is obviously annoyed and leaves first, along with his, like...
protege.
Branger.
Yeah,
so the two of them are a pair. And then... it's actually kind of touching. Like, I think the formality drops at this point because Kilvin comes up and he's like, I want you to come see me in the artificery. Like, I want you to be one of my students.
Oh, and I love this little conversation that they have because he's like, what are you doing tomorrow? And he's like, I'm whipped.
Gonna be getting whipped.
And he's like, what are you doing after? He's like... and
then Arwel's like, I think he's gonna be coming to see me at the...
Medica.
To get stitched up. Clearly those professors care about him. They're very, like, human in their interactions with Kavoth, which is really cool.
It's kind of funny, too, because, like, without outright saying it, they're like, you're part of the club, kid! Like,
yeah, they really take a shine to him. I really like it.
Yeah.
And they obviously were on his side the whole time, so it was cool. So he does agree to go see Kilvin the day after his whipping. And then he's just sitting there with the Chancellor, and he notices that, like, the Chancellor seems a lot less stern and a lot younger than he expected once he's not in his position of authority. So there's, like, very much a breaking down of barriers between the two of them. And Kavoth apologizes for being so much trouble. So much trouble so soon. And the Chancellor's like, oh, were you gonna wait on that? Like, what do you mean? And Kavoth's like, I would have waited a little bit, before
like
getting in too much trouble. So yeah, they poke fun at the situation a little bit. But I feel like they're definitely, like, a little more buddy-buddy because of it. The Chancellor notes that, like, he doesn't look as that worried for someone who's going to be whipped tomorrow. And at this point, Kavoth's still in the Heart of Stone. So he's like, I'll heal. No big deal. And the Chancellor shakes his hand, welcomes him to the Arcanum, and leaves him by himself, at which point he comes out of the Heart of Stone, and then he's like, oh, shit.
I just endured some stuff.
Yeah, that was crazy. But he leaves the horns, and Simon was there waiting for him the whole time to see how he did. Simon is excited for him, offers to buy him a bandage and a beer for his predicament. And Kavoth tries to go back to bed, is applauded by all his bunkmates for dicking over Hemme and getting away with it, but then...
and getting into the Arcanum.
But then he gets moved to the dormitory for Arcanum students, and he gets a much chillier welcome there, because all the students had to really put in a lot of work to get promoted to the Arcanum, and he got in on day 2. But he says that even though he feels alone and a little bit isolated in his bunk, he finally feels like he was where he was meant to be all along.
Awesome. Just awesome.
And that brings us to our very last chapter in this section, chapter 41, Friend's Blood. So it is the day of the whipping, and Kvothe gets up pretty early. The whipping's supposed to take place at noon, and he has all morning to kill, so he leaves his dorm and ends up running into Willem, and the two of them hang out for the whole morning. Which I think is
good friend move.
Really cool. Yeah, they definitely have like their own solo time and develop a bond. It's very, very sweet. There's not much to this section except for the fact that Kvothe asks him to buy him
Null route. So he asks Willem to buy him a couple scruples of null route from the apothecary.
Is a scruple an amount? It's not like saying a couple of dollars, right? It's not a
no,
money.
I think it's like a actual like amount.
Okay.
Thankfully enough, Willem does not know much about the substance because he would have realized that it's going to be used as a numbing agent and
it's
make
like
the whipping go
not
much
like an
easier.
anesthetic, but like it definitely makes Kvothe a little out of it. It numbs his back and prevents him from bleeding out when he gets whipped later. Which I don't know if that's like illegal, but I think it's something a little iffy.
Well, it's classic Kvothe. He has to do everything his way, and if he's going to bend the rules to do it, so be it. But this whole part is just awesome. So, Willem, class act, does the favor for Kvothe, and he gets a null route because he says it's to settle his stomach, which is a believable lie considering the fact that he's about to get whipped, and anyone who's about to get whipped would be terrified.
Yeah, they just kind of spend the morning together, and it's fun. They talk about, like Willem's like, why in your language do people say this or that? And then Kvothe speaks to him a little bit in his language, so they swap, like, idioms. So just kind of getting to know each other, and eventually when it's about time for Kvothe to be whipped, Willem looks a little uncomfortable, but he's like, I have to go.
Yeah, there's a great line here, and it's actually for the title of the chapter. He's like, I'm not very fond of blood. He gave me a shaky smile. My blood, friend's blood. Which is obviously the title of the chapter. And it's just like,
but also that means that's he considers Kvothe a friend and calls him a friend to his face.
Yeah, and it really solidifies that friendship.
It does, yeah. But it's also, it's nice that he hung out the whole morning, but I totally see why he doesn't want to hang out any longer.
Yeah, it's like, dang.
Like, it's not fun to watch violence.
I do love this little response Kvothe says, though, after Willem's like, I'm not fond of blood. He goes, I don't plan on doing much bleeding. But don't worry, you've got me through the hard part, the waiting. And it's so true. Like,
it's
that
so
anticipation's got to be, like, awful.
Horrible. I mean, even just anticipation of, like, taking a test, which is significantly less scary than being publicly whipped.
Oh, yeah.
It's horrible.
So, he makes his way over to the pennant pole, and, like, everyone's there. It seems like
Heme let his class go, yeah, so that everyone could come watch. Ugh.
There's, like, 200 people there.
He's very, like, collected and not confident in, like, a mean way, but, like, knows what's happening and is very businesslike about it. So he just, like, goes to the pole.
Yeah, he wasn't proud, he wasn't arrogant, he just kind of simply walked to the pole.
Yeah, but he wasn't nervous or weak about it either.
No. There's a really just awesome part where one of the, I don't want to call it like an executioner, but
whoever's doing it, do they give him a name?
No,
anyway, whoever's going to do the whipping.
Kvothe starts to take off his shirt, and the man who was going to whip him tells him that you don't need to go shirtless, it'll save you from the sting. And Kvothe just turns, and I just love this line. He's like, I'm not going to ruin a perfectly good shirt. And so Kvothe takes off his shirt, and then he's about to bind his hands to the iron ring that he's supposed to hold.
The guy who's supposed to whip him is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kvothe is like, absolutely not. And he's like, you don't need to worry about me running off.
The guy says it's not for running off, though. It's for in case you pass out and fall down.
And he goes, if I pass out, you do whatever you wish. Until then, he will not be tied. And I don't know if that's just, like, maybe going back, like, as a pride thing, or, like, back to his Edema Rue roots, where it's just, like, since his family always got, like, a bad rep of being, like, thieves and swindlers and outcasts, that it's just, like...
Oh, maybe. I just thought it was, like, a pride thing.
Mm.
And in his head, he has every intention of standing through this and walking away because he has taken the null route as kind of like an FU to Heme.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't want to give Heme the satisfaction of seeing him, like, weak and pass out. So I think he, by not tying his hands, he's not even giving himself that option. But it's also kind of like...
just badass.
Yeah, and also, like, the taking of the shirt, like, I understand he doesn't want to ruin his shirt, but I feel like it's very much like a teenage boy thing to be like, I have no shirt on, like...
Oh, no, I just think it's, like, classic, like, the Maru, like, forever the performer, like, just no fear, like, if you're gonna accept this punishment, you, like, take it with, like, grace and, like, that kind of deal. Also poor and only own 2 shirts.
Yeah, most of it's the fact he only owns 2 shirts, but, like, it's not hurting his reputation.
No.
By any means. I mean, he's definitely cocky, like, when he ties himself up in Tarpey, and he's like, I look like a noble's son, so I think he thinks highly of his looks as well.
Yeah. So, they get on with the whipping, 3 vicious cracks across his back. Honestly, this part just is awesome.
It all goes exactly the way he wanted.
Everything. He doesn't pass out. He just simply, like, regains his, like, composure after getting whipped, folds up his shirt in his hands, and just walks away, and everyone's just silent and just staring.
It's so good. And this is where he gets the nickname Kavoth the Bloodless, which is on the back of the book. It's not specifically mentioned that much in this scenario, but I think the part where he says to Willem, I don't plan on doing much bleeding, is, like, the indication that that's where that nickname comes from.
Thus, this ends chapter 41 and our episode for this week. Probably some of my favorite beginning moments for Kavoth when he attends the university. Just really great plot points and engaging situations that happen, and it really solidifies his identity
edge of
there.
Your seat, because, like, the whole thing with Hem, you want to see how that plays out. You want to see how the thing with Ambrose plays out. The confrontation with Lauren about researching the Chandrian. Like, it feels like, despite getting into the university, a lot of things did not go particularly well.
Yeah.
And he's already made several enemies.
Yeah, it's like that balance. Like, great friends, powerful enemies. Like,
yeah, so he's on his way to having a very large reputation and making a name for himself for sure in the university. We'll try to post again in 2 weeks. Until then, you can find us on our website, fantasticbookspod.com, through which you can email us. You can also find us on our Instagram at fantasticbookspod. Please rate, review, and subscribe, and we will see you next time.
And until then, happy reading.
This podcast was recorded by Anna Opushinsky and Sam Furman, edited by Anna Opushinsky, produced by Anna Opushinsky and Sam Furman, with webpage and artwork designed by Anna Opushinsky. Thanks, listeners. If you're looking for more, check us out at fantasticbookspod.com, where we have book reviews, reading list suggestions, merch, and you can even send us a message.
Or find us on Facebook and Instagram at Fantastic Books Pod.
And if you like what you've been hearing, don't forget to leave us a review.
Thanks.
Goldenrise Media.